What if the most dominant football team of the last decade never should have won a single one of its trophies? That's the question hanging over Manchester City right now. And it all comes down to one number: 115. Let's rewind to 2008. Back then, Manchester City was a mid-table club with no real history of winning anything significant. No major trophies in decades, no real European pedigree. Just another club fighting to stay relevant in English football. Then everything changed. Sheikh Mansour, a member of the ruling family of Abu Dhabi, bought the club, and almost overnight, the spending began. New signings, new facilities, a new training complex, and eventually, a brand new identity. Within a few short years, City went from also-rans to genuine title contenders. Within a decade, they were arguably the most dominant club English football had ever seen, winning league titles, domestic cups, and eventually the Champions League itself. But while all of this was happening on the pitch, questions were quietly building in the background. In 2018, a German magazine published a series of leaked internal documents, emails, contracts, financial records that had been obtained from inside the club. Those documents suggested something uncomfortable: that City's transformation wasn't purely the result of smart recruitment and ambitious ownership. According to the allegations, some of the financial success the club reported to football's governing bodies may not have told the full story. That leak triggered a lengthy investigation by the Premier League, one that would take years to complete. And in 2023, that investigation finally produced something English football had never seen before: a formal referral to an independent commission covering 115 separate charges spanning nearly a decade of the club's history. Now, 115 sounds like an almost absurd number. It conjures up images of more than 100 separate scandals. But the reality is more structured than that. These charges aren't 115 unrelated incidents. They group into a handful of core categories, repeated across multiple seasons. Understanding those categories makes the whole case much easier to follow. The first group of allegations centers on sponsorship revenue. The Premier League alleges that City made it appear as though money coming in from certain sponsors, companies with links to Abu Dhabi, was independent commercial income, negotiated at arm's length like any other sponsorship deal. The allegation is that, in reality, a significant portion of that money may have originated from the owner himself, channeled through these sponsorship arrangements to make the club's finances look healthier and more self-sustaining than they actually were. If true, this matters enormously because financial fair play rules exist specifically to prevent clubs from being bankrolled directly by wealthy owners without limit. Disguising owner funding as commercial revenue would effectively be a way around those rules. The second group concerns how a former manager was paid. The allegation here is that part of his compensation was funneled through a separate consultancy arrangement, money that, if the claims are accurate, should have been disclosed as part of the club's normal financial reporting, but allegedly wasn't. On its own, this might sound like a relatively minor accounting issue, but in the context of football's financial rules, accurate reporting of all expenditure is exactly what regulators rely on to assess compliance. That's 2 groups down, 3 to go, and the next ones get even more direct. The third group involves player and staff financial information more broadly, including image rights arrangements and salary details. Clubs are required to disclose this information accurately to the league, and the charges allege that, in various instances, the information provided wasn't accurate. The fourth group is more direct, breaching financial regulations. City are accused of breaching both UEFA's financial sustainability rules and the Premier League's own financial framework, across a period spanning multiple seasons, not just a single year. And the fifth and final group relates to the investigation itself, alleging that City failed to fully cooperate with the Premier League as it tried to gather information. So when you step back and look at the full picture, 115 charges isn't really 115 different scandals happening in isolation. It's closer to one alleged pattern of behavior, broken down into individual rule breaches across nearly a decade, which is also exactly why the case has taken so long to resolve. That brings up a fair question. Other clubs have faced financial punishments far more quickly. Everton lost points. Nottingham Forest lost points. Those cases were resolved within months. So why has City's case dragged on for years without a verdict? The answer comes down to scale and process. Those other cases were handled through a relatively straightforward disciplinary process, dealing with a single, well-defined breach. City's case is being heard by an entirely separate independent commission, a much more thorough legal process used specifically because the scale and seriousness of the allegations go far beyond a typical financial breach. Add to that the fact that City have consistently and strongly denied every single charge, contesting the case at every stage, and you end up with one of the most complex and drawn-out legal disputes English football has ever experienced. Multiple rounds of evidence, expert testimony, and legal argument stretched out over years rather than weeks. So what actually happens once a verdict finally arrives? There are really two broad outcomes worth thinking through. If City are found guilty of a significant portion of these charges, the punishments could range quite widely. At the lighter end, that might mean a points deduction. At the more severe end, given the number of seasons potentially involved, some pundits have suggested punishments could include stripped titles or even relegation in the most extreme scenario. For some context, Juventus were docked 15 points in Italy over false accounting allegations, a case involving a much narrower set of issues than what's being alleged against City. Given the scope of this case spans multiple seasons and multiple categories of alleged wrongdoing, some legal commentators believe a guilty verdict here could carry consequences more severe than anything football has previously dealt with. But there's another scenario worth considering too. If City are cleared entirely or only lightly sanctioned, that raises a different kind of question altogether. If the richest, most heavily scrutinized club in football can ultimately fight off charges of this scale and complexity, what does that say about the strength of football's financial regulations in general? Could it set a precedent that clubs backed by enormous resources can simply outlast any investigation, treating fines or minor penalties as just another cost of doing business? That's a question that extends well beyond Manchester City itself and touches on whether financial fair play rules can ever really be enforced against the very wealthiest owners in the sport. Whatever the outcome, this case is likely to define how financial regulation in football works for years to come. It's not just about one club's trophies. It's about whether the rules meant to keep football financially competitive actually have any teeth when tested against the biggest spenders in the game. So that's the situation in simple terms. A club that transformed from mid-table also-rans into the most dominant team in English football within a little over a decade. Now facing the most serious and complex financial case the sport has ever seen, with a verdict that could reshape the competitive landscape of English football no matter which way it goes. If you want to understand the bigger picture beyond this one case, how clubs in general try to work around financial fair play rules and what's actually replacing the current system starting next season, that's exactly what we're covering next. Subscribe so you don't miss it, and we'll see you in the next one.